He is a local attorney who spent time in prison for bribing a city councilman.
So why are city leaders and independents meeting with John Carnes behind closed doors?
In 2018, the I-Team revealed independent city council members met behind closed doors with Carnes in regards to two of the city's most costly and controversial contracts. After we aired our initial stories on Carnes' involvement, the FBI started poking around City Hall.
An independence attorney indicted on several counts related to tax fraud.
And the indictment stems from several stories our I-Team exposed back in 2018. And here we are today. John Carnes appeared in court for the first time on those federal charges.
That court appearance comes as the I-Team uncovers stunning details about how one of those projects got approved.
Investigator Jessica McMaster, who has covered the story from the very beginning, was in court today.
Inside the courtroom, federal prosecutors told the judge they have 1.5 gigabytes of Carnes' financial records they'll be submitting into evidence. Carnes' attorney says this is all one big misunderstanding.
Attorney, former independent city council member, previous Jackson County legislator, convicted felon, also a part of John Carnes' resume. And now Carnes has been indicted again. While Carnes' 30-year-old conviction was for bribing a member of the independent city council to vote on contracts to help his clients, the latest indictment is for tax evasion and obstruction. Carnes claims he's being targeted unfairly by the feds because of our reporting.
John Carnes. We reached out to John Carnes.
There's millions of people in this country that are in the same tax situation that I am. And this is a selective enforcement.
In 2018, the I-Team revealed Carnes had involvement in several high-dollar contracts. Those contracts are part of this indictment. The indictment doesn't suggest why. Back in 2018, the contracts caused suspicion among residents and city council members alike.
Why would you take a pristine piece of property in the middle of the city and turn it into a solar farm?
I do have suspicions.
We've told you about the Rockwood Golf Course turned city solar panel. The property alone, $1 million deal. The project all handled behind closed doors, some of which we revealed included meetings with John Carnes. Then there's Missouri City. It's the largest contract ever issued by the city, and for a project that didn't need to happen. The old power plant located in a desolate area of Missouri and deemed safe by the EPA didn't need to be removed.
My position was, why spend $10 million?
Still, majority of the city council, with the exception of Scott Roberson and Karen DeLucy, voted to get rid of it and selected the most expensive bidder, even though another qualified bidder would do the job for half the price.
We're talking about $5 million.
We could not find the basis for making that decision.
The I-Team found this old agenda that shows the high bidder gave an exclusive pitch on the project to City Hall 1 year before the bidding opened.
Was this scripted before we hit the gavel and said the meeting's open?
The I-Team found a dinner receipt that shows within days of that exclusive meeting, council members Kurt Doherty, Tom Van Camp, and John Perkins met with John Carnes about the project. At the time, Carnes told the I-Team he had a client who was going to finance Missouri City.
That's ludicrous.
So you're saying that's a bogus claim?
Oh, I don't believe it for a minute.
The city manager says outside financing was never considered. While the indictment doesn't indicate how Carnes was involved with Missouri City or Rockwood, it does reveal Carnes deposited $230,000 from the combined projects. Cameras weren't allowed inside the courtroom, but as Carnes stood before a federal judge for the second time, he entered a not guilty plea.
We spoke with Carnes and his attorney coming out of the courtroom. They tell us they're hiring an accountant to go over those tax records. Carnes' attorney says Carnes may or may not owe back taxes, but that either way, there's no criminal intent here. Carnes' pretrial is set for June. For the I-Team, I'm Jessica McMaster, KSHB 41 News.
Our I-Team gets an exclusive on-camera interview with John Carnes, the independent's attorney indicted this week on charges related to tax evasion.
That indictment is connected to several I-Team investigations. Senior I-Team reporter Jessica McMaster has been reporting on the story for years.
Yeah, guys, those contracts are now named in this 7-page indictment that states John Carnes made nearly $250,000 off those two city-related projects. We covered the projects in 2018 where some council members were worried about backroom deals. When we first asked Carnes about his involvement, he told us he was going to represent clients in both projects, but ultimately that he had no involvement.
He's a guy we've tried talking to for the past 4 years.
John Carnes tells us he'd rather stand out in a snowdrift than speak with us.
Carnes called to cancel our scheduled interview, but when we showed up to his office Friday, he decided to speak with us.
I did it for you. I don't want you to lose your job. You got to turn in some stories.
Carnes is known for having close ties around Independence City Hall, which raises a few eyebrows, considering his past conviction for bribing a member of the city council, all things we've reported on previously.
Why are city leaders in Independence meeting with John Carnes behind closed doors?
These 2 dining receipts started it all. It reveals council members Kurt Doherty, Tom Van Camp, and John Perkins discussed city business with Carnes over lunch. That business just happens to be 2 of the city's most high-cost and controversial city-issued contracts, Rockwood Golf Club and Missouri City, a $10.5 million cost to Independence taxpayers that even 2 members of the city council found suspicious.
It raises questions in my mind.
After we aired our initial stories on Carnes' involvement, the FBI started poking around City Hall, but Carnes claims that's proof he's done nothing wrong.
I think the fact that the federal government stayed out here for months. Do you see anything on those issues?
Well, part of the indictment lists Missouri City, the cash that you made off of that.
That's correct. That's correct.
The indictment shows Carnes deposited $232,000 in fees from the combined Rockwood and Missouri City projects.
Do you see why the citizens would be concerned that their council members were meeting behind closed doors with you on these very high-dollar controversial projects? Hang on. When, considering your history that, you have gone to prison for bribing council members.
I think you misstated that. Every meeting I have with these council members was open. That's the fact that they turned in a receipt, that we had a lunch together. I think that, to the contrary, it's been an open discussion, and I believe that the result of the Rockwood purchase was good for the city, and I believe that it's a project that the city could be proud of.
How is it open, though, if you're meeting in restaurants with just a couple council members, the rest of the council doesn't know, and you guys didn't tell the public in advance that this would be going on? They didn't get invited to these meetings.
Well, I couldn't afford to pay their bill, too, for lunch.
The indictment states Carnes corruptly obstructed the IRS by dealing in cash and receiving cash from clients, but not depositing it into his bank accounts.
I think a person's entitled to pay his bills and support himself with cash. I don't think that's changed. I don't think that's illegal.
Carnes claims the IRS is targeting him for tax issues because of our stories.
There's millions of people in this country that are in the same tax situation that I am, and this is a selective enforcement.
Carnes is expected to be arraigned on January 5th. We're going to be there for it. For the I-Team, I'm Jessica McMaster, KSHB 41 News.
Independence attorney has been indicted on several counts related to tax fraud. Now, the indictment stems from information our I-Team exposed on John Carnes back in 2018. Senior I-Team reporter Jessica McMaster has more on the indictment and how our reporting led to accountability.
This is the federal indictment against John Carnes, who was arrested Wednesday for tax evasion and obstruction. It's tied directly to 2 controversial projects in Independence we first told you about in 2018, the Rockwood Golf Club and the Missouri City Power Plant.
I don't doubt for a minute there's something going on.
That's late Independence City Council member Karen DeLucci in 2018. After the I-Team first exposed, John Carnes met behind closed doors with other members of the city council regarding 2 of the city's most costly and most controversial contracts. You're probably wondering why that matters. Take a look back at our previous reporting. Carnes is a local attorney who spent time in prison for bribing a council member to vote in favor of a project that would benefit Carnes' client. Carnes served his time back in the late 80s. The 2 recent projects we exposed Carnes had involvement in, the demolition of Missouri City and the purchase of Rockwood Golf Club. It's an old power plant in a desolate area that the EPA deemed safe, and council members DeLucci and Scott Roberson didn't want to spend any taxpayer money removing it since it wasn't necessary.
My position was, why spend $10 million?
While DeLucci and Roberson tried to stop it, the rest of the council voted in favor of removing the power plant and hired the high bidder of $8.9 million, Environmental Operations, Inc., out of St. Louis, to do the job. But the I-Team exposed the project could have been done by another qualified and preferred bidder for half the price.
We're talking about $5 million.
The rest of the council instructed city staff to only negotiate with Environmental Operations, Inc., and directed them to stop ranking the bids, going against protocol. But then there's this old agenda that shows Environmental Operations, Inc. got an exclusive invite to City Hall to pitch the project 1 year before the bidding began.
Was this scripted before we hit the gavel and said the meeting's open?
But it's this dinner receipt the I-Team discovered that reveals Carnes' involvement. It shows council members Kurt Doherty, Tom Van Camp, and John Perkins met with Carnes just a couple weeks before Environmental gave its exclusive pitch. The topic of that dinner meeting, Missouri City. We asked Councilmember Doherty what took place during this discussion with Carnes that DeLucci and Roberson say happened in secret.
I honestly don't know why they would be meeting with him about Missouri City.
He represented some guy who wanted to finance it.
That's ludicrous.
So you're saying that's a bogus claim?
Oh, I don't believe it for a minute.
In a phone call, Carnes matched Doherty's story, telling us he had a client who wanted to finance the project. But why would Carnes be representing anyone on city-related, taxpayer-funded projects? Carnes spent time in prison for bribing a council member. The city manager said outside financing was never even considered for Missouri City. Then there's the Rockwood Golf Club, which the city purchased and turned into a solar farm. The city could have bought the property from the former owner for around $500,000. Joe Campbell, a developer, purchased the land instead, but just a couple months later, Campbell sold it to the city for nearly $1 million, a more than $400,000 profit for Campbell.
It raises questions in my mind.
When talks with the former owner began about the city purchasing the land, there was another closed-door meeting, according to that landowner.
It was Tom Van Camp, city council member, and John Carnes.
At the time, Carnes denied any involvement with Rockwood. Today, the 7-page indictment shows Carnes deposited $232,000 in fees from both the Missouri City and Rockwood projects. The money went into Carnes' attorney trust accounts. The FBI took Carnes into custody on charges of failing to pay taxes, tax evasion, and obstruction, saying Carnes took cash from his attorney trust accounts to pay personal expenses and to gamble.
Now that the FBI says Carnes did make a profit of nearly $250,000 on the two projects out of Independence, we asked the city for comment. We were told a statement was being worked on, but have not received it just yet. Carnes is out on bail. He's expected to be arraigned on January 5th. We'll be there. For the I-Team, I'm Jessica McMaster, KSHB 41 News.